In 1532, 168 Spaniards walked into the heart of an empire of 80,000 and walked out victorious. No walls were breached, no long battle followed, and within roughly an hour, the ruler of the Inca world was a prisoner. How did that happen? The Inca Empire at this moment was vast, wealthy, and recent. It stretched across the Andes, bound together not by writing, but by roads, messengers, and absolute obedience to the Sapa Inca. At the top stood Atahualpa, newly victorious in a brutal civil war against his brother. The empire was intact, but its leadership was strained. Armies were mobilized, generals were hardened. Power had been proven through force. Atahualpa was not hiding. He was resting near Cajamarca, surrounded by tens of thousands of soldiers. He had defeated all internal rivals. No foreign enemy had ever threatened the Inca state in a meaningful way. When word reached him that a small group of strangers had entered the highlands, he did not react with fear. He reacted with confidence. The Spaniards, led by Francisco Pizarro, were few. Their numbers were known even to themselves as dangerously small. They were far from reinforcements, far from supply lines, and deep inside unfamiliar territory. They had seen the empire's roads, its storehouses, its disciplined forces. They understood the imbalance. And yet, they advanced. Cajamarca was not a battlefield. It was a town with a large central plaza, surrounded by buildings and narrow entrances. When Pizarro arrived, he did not spread his men across open ground. He concentrated them. He studied the square. He chose positions where cavalry and infantry could remain hidden from view. This decision mattered. Atahualpa agreed to meet them. This choice did not come from ignorance. The Inca ruler had already received reports about the Spaniards' animals, their weapons, their strange appearance. But reports were not experience. And in Inca political culture, power was demonstrated face to face. Submission was ritualized. Authority was visual. Atahualpa did not come as a cautious general preparing for combat. He came as a ruler expecting recognition. He entered Cajamarca carried on a litter, accompanied by nobles, attendants, and ceremonial guards. According to the accounts preserved in the historical record, the large army remained outside the town. Inside the plaza, Atahualpa was surrounded by status, not soldiers prepared for battle. The square itself was quiet. The Spaniards did not announce themselves with force. They did not line up in formation. They did not charge. They waited, hidden, silent, weapons ready but unseen. This silence was intentional. Inca warfare followed patterns. Battles were announced, armies displayed themselves, signals were exchanged. There was time to read the enemy. In Cajamarca, none of that happened. The absence of visible threat reinforced Atahualpa's sense of control. Then the meeting began. A Spanish friar approached the Inca ruler. The exchange that followed was brief and tense. It was not a negotiation between equals. It was a demand framed in unfamiliar terms, grounded in a foreign religion and foreign authority. The concepts were not shared. The expectations did not align. What mattered was not theology. What mattered was timing. The moment passed. And nothing happened. For several seconds, the plaza remained still. Thousands of eyes watched. No attack came from the Inca side. No movement came from the Spanish ranks because they were not visible. The tension hung without release. Then the signal was given. Cannons fired. Horses burst from hiding. Steel flashed. Sound, movement, and violence struck at once. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The Inca attendants in the plaza had never experienced gunfire. The noise alone shattered formation. Horses, unfamiliar and terrifying, charged into dense crowds. Spanish soldiers pushed forward with swords and pikes, not to fight an army, but to cut through an unarmored mass. There was no time to adapt, no time to regroup, no clear enemy line to face. The attack wasn't aimed at the crowd. It was aimed at one person, Atahualpa. Spaniards fought their way directly toward the litter. Bearers were cut down. The platform fell. The ruler of the empire was dragged to the ground and seized. This moment mattered more than the deaths around it. In the Inca political system, authority flowed from the living body of the Sapa Inca. Command did not pass automatically. There was no immediate replacement. When Atahualpa was captured, command collapsed with him. Outside the town, tens of thousands of soldiers waited. Inside, their emperor was gone. The massacre continued briefly, but the outcome was already decided. The Spaniards did not pursue the main army. They did not need to. The objective had been achieved. Control had shifted. By the end of the encounter, the balance of power in the Andes had changed in a single afternoon, and the Incas had not yet understood how or why. They had lost their ruler without fighting a battle, and the consequences were only beginning. Atahualpa was alive. That single fact changed everything that followed. When the chaos inside Cajamarca finally slowed, the plaza was filled with bodies, broken litters, and scattered attendants. The Spaniards had suffered minimal losses. The imbalance was shocking, but the reason was already clear. The attack had not been a battle. It had been a seizure. Atahualpa, the Sapa Inca, the living center of imperial authority, was now a captive in the hands of fewer than 200 men. Outside the town, the vast Inca army did not attack. This hesitation was not cowardice, it was structure. The Inca system did not allow independent generals to act freely in a moment like this. Orders flowed downward from the ruler. With Atahualpa captured, no one had the authority to launch an assault that might risk his life. The Spaniards understood this faster than the Incas did. Pizarro immediately ordered that Atahualpa be treated as a valuable prisoner, not an enemy to be killed. Guards were placed around him. Violence against him was forbidden. His survival was leverage. Atahualpa, for his part, quickly grasped the situation. He was not panicked. Contemporary accounts describe him as composed, observant, and calculating. He asked questions. He watched how the Spaniards behaved. He learned. What he saw was a group of men obsessed with metal, gold, silver, objects, not land, not people, not loyalty. So he made an offer. In exchange for his release, Atahualpa promised to fill a room with gold and twice that amount in silver. This was not a metaphor. It was a physical measurement. The room would be filled to a marked height. Objects would be melted down if necessary. Temples would be stripped. Storehouses opened. For the Incas, gold was ceremonial. It was sacred, but not currency. It did not represent power in the same way it did to the Spaniards. For Atahualpa, the offer was immense, but acceptable. An emperor was worth more than metal. The Spaniards agreed. Messengers were sent across the empire. The roads that once carried imperial orders now carried demands. Gold began to arrive from distant regions. Sacred objects were dismantled. Artifacts centuries old were reduced to raw material. All of this happened while Atahualpa remained under guard. During this time, the imbalance that began at Cajamarca deepened. The Spaniards did not gain control through open warfare. They gained it through paralysis. The empire still existed. The armies were still intact. But decision-making was frozen. Atahualpa was still issuing commands, but now every order passed through Spanish hands. Access to him was controlled, information was filtered, influence shifted quietly. Tension grew among the Spaniards themselves. They were divided over what to do next. Some saw Atahualpa as indispensable. Others saw him as a threat. Rumors spread of Inca forces gathering. Fear mixed with greed. The gold room was filled. By any measure, the ransom was enormous. It represented one of the greatest transfers of wealth in the early modern world. And yet, it did not bring freedom. Once the ransom was complete, Atahualpa was no longer useful. This was the turning point. The Spaniards accused him of crimes, plotting rebellion, ordering killings, threatening their safety. Whether these accusations reflected real actions or fears amplified by isolation and mistrust is not always clear in the surviving sources. What is clear is the outcome. Atahualpa was put on trial. The trial did not follow Inca law. It did not follow Spanish law as it existed in Europe either. It followed the logic of conquest. The verdict was predetermined. Atahualpa was sentenced to death. He was offered a final choice: execution by fire or execution after baptism. Fire carried deep religious meaning for the Incas. It meant destruction beyond death. Baptism, though foreign, offered a different end. Atahualpa chose baptism. In 1533, the Sapa Inca was executed. With his death, the last restraint on Spanish action disappeared. But even then, the empire did not collapse instantly. Structures remained, cities stood, armies existed. What was gone was the unquestioned center of authority that bound everything together. The Spaniards would exploit this. They moved next, not with overwhelming force, but with manipulation. They installed a new ruler, a puppet, someone who could issue commands in the name of the empire while serving foreign interests. This strategy worked because it fit the existing system. Orders still came from the top. The form remained, even as the substance changed. Cajamarca had shown what was possible, not through numbers, not through strength alone, but through control of perception, timing, and leadership. The 1-hour ambush had not ended the Inca Empire. It had cracked it open, and now the Spaniards were inside. The death of Atahualpa did not end resistance. It ended certainty. Across the Andes, the structures of the Inca state were still visible. Roads remained staffed, storehouses were full, messengers still ran their routes, armies still stood in formation. But something essential was missing. The unquestioned authority of the Sapa Inca was gone, replaced by uncertainty and fear. The Spaniards moved carefully. They did not attempt to rule by force alone. They advanced using the empire's own systems, stepping into positions of influence rather than destroying them. A new ruler was installed, chosen not for strength, but for obedience. Orders once issued from Cusco now passed through Spanish approval. The form of the empire survived, even as its independence vanished. This strategy traced directly back to Cajamarca. What happened there had revealed a truth about power in the Inca world. Control did not depend on battlefield victory in the European sense. It depended on the ruler's physical presence. When Atahualpa was seized, authority stopped flowing. When he was executed, it fractured completely. The Spaniards had learned this lesson in less than an hour. Cajamarca was not remembered by the Incas as a battle. It was remembered as a shock. A moment when expectations failed so completely that reaction became impossible. The ambush worked because it attacked assumptions, not defenses. The Inca leadership had expected ritual, dialogue, a measured display of dominance. They encountered silence, concealment, and sudden violence. By the time they understood the nature of the threat, the center of power was already gone. This was not magic. It was not luck. It was timing. Pizarro did not defeat an army of 80,000. He bypassed it. He targeted the one figure without whom the army could not act. The weapons mattered. Horses, steel, and firearms created fear and confusion. But fear alone does not explain the outcome. Organization does. The Spaniards struck when Atahualpa was isolated. They struck in a confined space. They struck without warning. Every element multiplied the effect of their small numbers. The Incas had no reason to expect this kind of attack. In their experience, war followed rules. Even betrayal followed patterns. Cajamarca broke those patterns completely. Afterward, resistance continued in many regions. There were rebellions, sieges, long campaigns in difficult terrain. Conquest was not instant. It was contested, uneven, and violent. But it was no longer uncertain. The capture at Cajamarca gave the Spaniards something far more valuable than territory. It gave them legitimacy in the eyes of the system they were dismantling. Orders issued through an Inca ruler, even a controlled one, carried weight. Communities complied because compliance had always been survival. This is why numbers stopped mattering. An empire designed for centralized authority became vulnerable when that authority was controlled by outsiders. The Spaniards did not need to fight every army. They needed to control the source of commands. Cajamarca made that possible. Looking back, the encounter feels impossible. 168 men against an empire, but that framing hides the real mechanism. The Spaniards did not overpower the Incas. They interrupted them. They exploited a moment when ritual replaced caution and confidence replaced security. The Incas did not lose because they were weak. They lost because the rules they lived by were turned against them. Cajamarca was not the end of the Inca world, but it was the moment when its fate shifted irreversibly. A single hour revealed how fragile even the largest systems can be when authority is concentrated and assumptions go unchallenged. Empires do not always fall in long wars. Sometimes they fall in silence. Sometimes they fall before they even realize a battle has begun. Cajamarca was not decided by numbers, weapons, or chance. It was decided by timing, psychology, and the control of authority. In less than an hour, the center of an empire was taken without a traditional battle, and the balance of power across the Andes shifted forever. The Incas did not lose because they were weak or unprepared. They lost because the rules they relied on were used against them. When authority was captured, the empire could no longer act as one. From that moment on, the outcome was no longer uncertain, only the pace at which it would unfold.